You are listening to Down Home. It's one of the most prolonged, brutal acts of cruelty that humans have enacted upon other humans in recorded history. The transatlantic slave trade. Slavery itself is a savage practice, but the system behind it was especially heinous. In this episode, me and Jay have a conversation with public speaker and cultural anthropologist Kurtis Brooks-Lnug about what he considers a few of the misconceptions of the Atlantic slave trade.
Breaking new ground, breaking new ground, breaking new ground, simple breaking new ground, breaking new ground, breaking new ground, simple breaking new ground, breaking new ground, breaking new ground, simple breaking new ground, breaking new ground, breaking new ground, yeah. On a high plateau.
Welcome to Down Home, the Nova Scotian experience by two black men. I am Derek Wise, and as always, we have Jay Jones.
What's happening, y'all?
And our guest this week is anthropologist, public speaker, Kurtis Brooks. Kurtis, how you doing, man?
Not bad. I'm doing good.
Good. So Kurtis, tell us a little bit about yourself and your Scotian story for those of our listeners that may not know who you are.
Born and raised in Toronto. Obviously, my heritage is Nova Scotian. Kind of used to spend our summers up there, and grew up around my uncles, my aunts, and everybody. Everybody's so welcoming. I've always loved it down home, and always had a passion for culture and history and where people are from, and that led into the discipline of anthropology, like getting to know people. You know, that's what we are. We're people. Eventually, after that, I started doing my own thing because it was important that got into the heavily into the Black community and got into making sure that we were knowing ourselves, because a lot of the times when it comes to Black people and our histories, first off, they're forgotten, and secondly, they haven't been able to be taught to us. So I got into the practice of teaching Black history for 11 years, from 2005 to 2016. Started learning a lot more in different areas, and started doing a lot more studying. And I don't know, here I am.
Mm-hmm. My cousin who works in education, and she actually took up the mantle of doing work with Black youth. She called it heavy work, though, because it is heavy work. So what kind of like attracted you or pushed you in the direction of doing that heavy work?
Where I grew up, we had like virtually all the guys I grew up with were drug dealers. And they would always say to me, they'd be like, "Don't do what we do."
Yeah.
And this is what they were always saying. And I'd see them with the nice cars. I'd see them with the bling at the time. They're always blazing with that. But they would always say to me, "Listen, you're one of the smart ones. Don't do what we do." And the thing about it is, I kind of admired what they were doing, not the part of it that's drugs and ruining people's lives, but the ability to do it. So these guys wouldn't write anything down. They wouldn't write anything down, because obviously if you get stopped by the cops, you get picked up. The cops have evidence, right, to put you away. So they had to keep everything in their minds. And these guys would kept all their clients' real names, their clients' aliases, they would keep all their numbers and everything in their head. And I was amazed by this, because I couldn't do this. I couldn't do this for the life of me. To not write things down, to not have some sort of paper trail, I couldn't do that. And it amazed me, because they knew the quantities, etc. And I recognized something, because when they would say to me that I was one of the smart ones, I said, no, I'm not really. Again, I can't do what you do, So I don't think I'm that smart. I think that what it is that I had a different upbringing. And in the way my mom was raising me, she said, "Okay, look, first off, we're not allowed to use slang." So to this day, you'll rarely hear me swear, and it's kind of a weird thing. Um, they don't, we weren't allowed to use slang. We had to present ourselves in a certain way. So I understood that it wasn't there was something wrong with the individuals at all. Quite the opposite. That they were superior in a lot of ways to the general society. It was just that the culture that they had been exposed to, or the things that were available to them, led them to the situation. And I saw so much wasted potential. One of I was big on poetry. I've always been big on poetry. And there's a poet. Can't remember the brother's name right now, but he put forth a piece that said, "Look, you know, there's nothing wrong with the hustlers. Just change the hustle, and make it a legal hustle, because that's
Mm,
all Gates does. That's all That's all. What do you? All these different billionaires do is they just make it a legal hustle, and even that, how legal is it? But anyway, that's another story. but uh, but he was talking to the brothers. Just make it a legal hustle,
yeah.
and then all of a sudden you'll have millionaires and billionaires. And so, that became my motivation, because as I grew up, people would always say that, hey, and the funny thing is, it's just the way I talk a little bit different, only
Mm,
because, like I said, I was penalized into talking this way. But but it wasn't any smarter than anybody else. If anything, in my eyes, I was actually dumber than the majority. I just spent my time doing different
mhm,
things that were considered to be more reputable, more respectable, and so on. So, yeah, that's why I got into to the education, because there's so many youth that you could reach out to, and raise people up, and there's so many people that just kind of miss out on opportunities,
Mhm.
um, and that's the end of that. But it doesn't have to be. We can, if we actually reach out in the right ways, and be those role models, be that change, as Gandhi would say. Um, you know, we can actually make that difference that needs to be made.
Mhm.
mhm. Yeah,
Very
the
true.
your story reminds me a lot about growing up in the north end of Halifax, and, in the '80s, the north end of Halifax, even though a very tight neighborhood, it did have its, socioeconomic problems. There was a fair amount of drugs and whatnot, and just like you're saying, like, you'd walk by and you'd pass some of these brothers that were doing their thing,
Mhm.
and very similar story. They would, look at me and say, "Hey, D, you're doing great, man. You're doing great."
Mhm.
And some of these guys have fallen by the wayside, like
Yeah.
too many to name.
And you know what? Like, it's a matter of culture.
Mm,
And this is the primary difference, that we have to understand. And when I say culture, what I mean is, the actual definition of culture. A lot of, by the way, I just gotta throw this off my chest very quickly, because it's an important point. There's a lot of terms that we misuse colloquially in society, right? So, and especially anthropological terms. People talk about anthropology without knowing that they're talking about anthropology, and all these terms are very much defined. So when we talk about culture, what we're talking about, is not spice and clothing and all that kind of stuff. The actual definition, or the anthropological definition, is that which is uh, carried, passed down from one generation to the next, and carried on beyond that, right? So whatever that custom is, this is why it permeates through food. This is why it permeates through clothing, and dress and style, and speech, because these are all the things that we pass down from one generation to the next, right? It's every generation does this. And it has the responsibility of doing this too, of filtering. So what you do is you're born and you have parents, and those parents are gonna teach you this, that, and the other. And most of that stuff you're gonna uh, pick up and take with you. And some of those things you're gonna decide to drop off. The things that you choose to hold on to, and you say, "Yeah, I'm gonna make sure that my children know this," that's culture,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And what has happened for us now as Black people on this continent is that we have lost our culture. We have lost our culture because historically, for historically, we've not written enough down and or passed it on orally, and that was deliberately messed up. That was deliberately interrupted by other aspects of the culture. So when that happens now, you're losing multiple generations of refinement, of filtering, of knowledge. You lose, this is why, we talk about the word bastard, right? What's a bastard? Well, a bastard specifically is a person without a father. And notice they don't talk about a mother. The reason for that is because the mother's always too busy doing work. She's
Mhm.
always too busy with sustenance and keeping every child alive. The father's usually the one who dispenses the knowledge because he has that kind of time. So he goes, and this is the aspect that people don't understand. So we have a word bastard for people, for children who don't have a father. Okay, well, why did they think it was relevant to come up with a word, to segregate these types of people? Well, it's because that element of culture starts to wane when you don't have a father,
Yeah.
and wane significantly. It's always said that men have children for legacy, and women have children for the love of it. And this is pretty much the case anywhere you go on the planet. Men, they're far more concerned with, hey, what's going to live on after I'm gone.
Right.
Women just love that baby. That's
Yeah,
my
yeah.
baby. I've made that. It's a beautiful thing, and I want to love it. I want to nurture it. That's the feminist perspective, the feminine
Mhm.
perspective. And so but the man is far more concerned with, kind of immortalizing himself and saying, yeah, you know what? I'm going to live on through this child. And
Mhm.
that's how culture is passed on, right? I'm going to live on through this child. Okay. So therefore, what does that actually mean? It means I'm going to impart every aspect of knowledge that I can about my history and our future to this child. And
Mhm.
so, um, people that don't get that, you know, um, very rarely are able to pick up that which they need in order to function properly in a society, especially if they are males, because they end up lacking that not only do they end up lacking that role model for how to be good men, which is a very important aspect of any society, but they also uh, lack in the sense of that connection to to their history.
Right,
And
right.
Mhm. Yeah.
yeah, so it's a big deal. It was a big enough deal for um, different government organizations to use that as a weapon, deliberately use that as a weapon against us
Mhm.
in their files. So
Mhm. Well, I mean, speaking of history and commerce and everything that sort of, on this journey of doing down home, discovering about, sort of issues, especially slavery. Um, what, in your opinion, are some of the misconceptions of the transatlantic slave trade? Like, obviously we know it runs deeper. Are there some things that you can, maybe tell us that we might not know about?
yeah, you know, there. Oh gosh, where to start with the transatlantic slave trade? Okay, so I think the largest. issue. The largest issue is first off the numbers. Okay, very. It's a challenge because okay, this event happened. Okay, the question is to what degree did it happen?
Mm,
So what we are taught and what we teach, what I taught for 11 years is that okay, well 12 million Africans were transported to the Americas over a period of roughly from the 1600s. 1619 is supposedly when the first ones arrived, and it legally ends in 1833 with in all the colonies, right? So that's when Britain outlaws it. So that's a period of what 200 and some odd years of transporting slaves, and this is the narrative that we're taught. The problem is that it's not true in a lot of respects. While there were some, there is less than a million that actually made it across in that middle passage.
really?
Mhm.
The vast majority of slaves were actually indigenous slaves.
Mm,
This is even more true and more documented in Canada. So Quebec was the largest province of slaveholders, and the vast majority of them um, were indigenous slaves. They call them primarily. They were primarily slaves coming from the Pawnee Nation. The Pawnee were the ones that were selling fellow indigenous slaves that they would capture from around their region and selling them into Quebec. People in Quebec were enslaving people as well. A lot of this translates. So most of this you're not going to see this record for because a lot of those times though, the slavers and slave masters found that the slaves, the African slaves, were indistinguishable from the indigenous slaves, and this is probably the biggest misconception that most people have, because if you couldn't tell the difference, because most of us, believe and have the understanding that hey, the vast majority of the vast majority of indigenous people look like what is truly Western indigenous people.
yeah.
So that traditional look of what you stereotypically think of as indigenous people, that's the Western Plains people, and there are different types of phenotypes in the Americas. In fact, all the different phenotypes were represented, but the most prominent ones were ones that were, again, to use the anthropological terms, the Negro or Negroid type, right?
Mhm.
That's where we get a lot of the confusion here. Is that a lot of the times they could not tell the difference between the indigenous versus the African because we look so similar that they were just simply like, oh, okay, we're going to take this. And then there was, of course, there was a lot of incentive for them to make that confusion as well.
Mhm.
Mhm. So the 12 million number, because that's the one that I
Yep.
remember just off the top of my head. Where does that come from then?
Okay. So it is an amalgamation of different ones. First and foremost, we got to remember that okay, we start off with 17 colonies. Okay, four in the North, Quebec, Ontario, New Brunswick, and Nova Scotia, and yeah, I already mentioned Ontario. And then you got the 13 colonies in the South. Okay, now in the South, we have a lot of people who, again, they were of the Negroid type, and this is part of the problem. Is that anthropology at the time was still in its infancy. Okay, um, so there there's they were trying to part of anthropology, or a large part, in fact, the largest part of anthropology is categorizing people. How do we understand, the differences between people? Because we're not really too concerned with the similarities, because we know what those similarities are, right? Biologically, we have all the same blood types, we all have all the same, muscle mass, all the same, et cetera, et cetera. So what are the differences between people? And that's what we're trying to focus on to see, especially in cultural anthropology, where you find the most difference. But anyway, so at the time they were trying to find, ways of categorizing and grouping people, and so they come up with the concept of races. This is vaguely already understood before this, but this is where they canonize it, and they start saying, okay, look, so these people from Northeast Asia, we're going to call them the Orient, because that's where we got our orientation from, right? A lot of the education that they got as Europeans came from Asia, so they oriented themselves towards that, and this is why they started calling them the Orientals. Then you got the Southeast Asian, the people there, Shindu, Hindu, so they refer to them as the Hindus. Then you got the Africans, and they're characterized by their phenotype, or dark skin was what they connected with it. So they said, okay, yeah, the term for them is Negroid. And then when they came to North America, it was very interesting, because they saw people that were very similar. In fact, most of the explorers, their firsthand accounts, once you see those accounts, they talk about, they're frequently confusing us with Africans.
Hmm.
So they're saying that they keep meeting the indigenous here, and they keep calling them Negroid. And it's very confusing for them, and you can see why. So they often give these explanations, and it's funny because one of the explorers kind of it is truly hilarious to me anyway, because he's writing in his journal about he's gone to all these different continents all over the world, and God damn it, he can't get away from these damn Negroids. It's hilarious. It's like, how did they take over the world? We're so great, and we should have taken over the world, and yet everywhere I go, I find Negroes. And it's funny in that respect, because it's like, you can see that the genuine accounts, because there's genuine emotion behind them, where they're literally lamenting the fact that they cannot find others like themselves. But it stands in contrast to the concept that we've been taught in school. Again, we've been taught that there is one type of phenotype on this continent, and yet over and over again we're rediscovering that wasn't true. But rather that not only that was there every phenotype, two main phenotypes that we see in North America, two main physical types, which was, again, the more Mongoloid, quote unquote, Mongoloid Midwestern nations. And then the rest of the continent, they find Negroid type people who look like us. And those people are now then enslaved, and enslaved en masse. Either they're enslaved or they're driven out of their lands. Okay? And as they do so, as they go into these lands and start driving people, you want to drive the mass majority of the people out of land when you're trying to conquer it, especially the men.
Mhm.
Why? Because the men are the ones who fight back, right? So you need to either kill a whole bunch of them off, or drive them out of the land, which is why you see these mass migrations straight down into the south, into Florida, and then you
Right.
have that whole situation with the Seminoles and that kind of thing, and then you have the Trail of Tears going into Oklahoma and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
Now, with us, it's always been a little bit different, but those numbers come out of the enslavement of these First Nations peoples. Okay. Now, the problem arose when they started making agreements. Okay, so the Europeans arriving, they start losing the wars. Okay, something that again, they don't like to teach you in history, but they start losing a lot of these wars because they're outnumbered. There's a whole bunch of us, and we surround them. So what they started doing is they start writing treaties, right, in a lot of situations, and they say, hey, look, let's declare peace. We don't want any more fighting. We're doing peace. Okay, sounds good. Sign off. Bam. It's a peace treaty. No fighting. Okay. But then what starts happening is there's abductions happening. Okay? Obviously, they're not abductions of Europeans, but rather they're abductions of indigenous peoples. This starts happening all throughout, Georgia, Alabama, and including in Nova Scotia as well. And they start taking people away. And every time the leaders of the indigenous leaders are going and saying, hey, look, are you guys doing this to us? The colonists, hey, our hands are clean. We didn't do anything, right? Who's doing the abducting? Well, they're so-called pirates. And this is where we started getting into, the Hollywood side of things. The Pirates of the Caribbean are the ones who are doing this. This is who these pirates truly are, right? So the main commerce, there is other commerce. There is sugar, there's tobacco, there's all sorts of different things that they're doing. But the main commerce that they're dealing in, as Pirates of the Caribbean, is slaves.
Mm-hmm.
Right? This is why they get the reputation of this ruthlessness. Mm-hmm. And furthermore, it's why they propagate this reputation of ruthlessness. Why? Because to be a slaver, you have to be ruthless, because you have to scare the slave population into not revolting against you, right, and to not rising up against you. So what they start doing is they go in, and of course, by the way, I was kind of being a little bit facetious earlier when I was saying, like, the colonists absolutely know what this is. In fact, a lot of the times the colonists are actually instigating and paying off these privateers, because that's what they are. They're guns for hire. Well, we think of pirates as, I don't know what we have this.
Yeah, we romanticize.
Yes.
Yeah, we have this romanticized view of what a pirate is, but in reality, what these pirates are is they're privateers. They're people. They were people who owned ships who were basically mercenaries for hire. Is really what they are on the seas. And so these guys are going in, and the colonists are saying, hey, yeah, go for it. We can't be recognized as being people who are stealing these indigenous people from their villages, from the homes, right? Because if we're recognized, any of our people are recognized, right? Then that will be it. That
breaks the treaty, right? Yeah,
exactly. That's the end of our treaty. So go in there, snatch them in the middle of the night, take them out, and do whatever you guys do with them. Sell them. So on the pirates side of things, that's what they would do, they're not going. Where are they taking them? They have to take them far away from their people, so they can't recognize the language and can't recognize the people, right? Because remember, we're back in the day, we're doing trade too. We're doing trade, one nation to the next nation. We're all doing trade with each other, right? Yeah. So they're going to, recognize each other's languages. They're going to recognize, that kind of thing, right? So what they would do is they take them to the Caribbean. Okay, this is how some parts of the Caribbean get populated that weren't populated, and in other parts they just mix them up into it, and they just trade. Some people from Georgia are being sent to Nova Scotia. People from Nova Scotia are being sent to be a slave in Jamaica. They're just mixing everybody up. So this is what we call privateer laundering, or slave laundering, rather. And this is what we call slave laundering. The point is just to mix and jumble everybody up so that they come out clean on the other side. So that they can't be identified with people that they have a treaty with, to say, hey, look, we have a peace treaty, you broke the treaty, now we're going to come kick your asses.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
So this is what they're doing throughout the Caribbean, and they do this for pretty much the whole time. The vast majority of slave trading is happening there. And in fact, even the first instance of slavery, that we document to say from 1619 in where was it? Uh, I was in Virginia there. That one wasn't actually from Africa either.
Mm.
Right? Oftentimes we get confused with the term Negro, and this is the problem. This is the main problem that we end up having, is that we think Negroes are Africans, when in fact Negro is a phenotypical expression. Okay, it's people who look like you and I. That's what a Negro is by the original definition of the term. And that term is what is used in the official documents back in the day. They don't use
Right.
African, right?
Mhm.
They use
Mhm.
Negro,
Yeah.
right? And Negro is also defined as being, so depending on which colony you're in, because they all had started doing, remember, these colonies all acted as individual, um, essentially countries, for lack of a better word, until they become the United States, right?
Mhm.
They're acting as individual countries. And so they have their own legal definitions. And they all have, they're slightly askewed, right? Slightly different from one another. But the term Negro, um, uh, that best describes what we're talking about here, is they say as good as an African.
Really?
Mm.
Yes,
That's interesting.
as good as, and this is defined in the Virginia Slave Act. We have it on our site,
Mhm.
um, but where you can read exactly the wording. But it's as good as an African, or akin to African. And the
Mhm.
Mhm.
reason they said that, they set that up, is they were actually having a problem at the time. It's kind of it's a weird problem because, you know like, I couldn't make this shit up. Anyway, so it's a weird problem to have because it's a problem that kind of is very disgusting. But essentially, what was happening is, first off, they were only moving male slaves around for the most part.
Mhm.
They're not really, they occasionally they have female slaves, but that they move around female slaves. Most of it's male slaves. Okay, and what's happening at this point is, remember I said they always push the men out because they were
Yeah.
causing wars, right? Okay, so what's left? You have a whole bunch of women left on the land with, that you're doing plantations on. So there's a whole bunch of women. Think about it. You're, as a slave owner, you have 10 women, let's just say, on your slave plantation. Okay. Well, here's the thing. I could buy more slaves, or I can buy one male and have now 20 new slaves. And at the time in the slave market, African slaves were the highest priced.
Mhm.
Okay, because on average they were taller, they were bigger, they're wider, more muscular, et cetera, and they were seen as like the Rolls Royce of slaves, right? So what slavers would do, what slave breeders would do, is they go and they buy one African and bring him in as a bull and have him impregnate all the indigenous black women that they had, right, that were already working. And so now he paid top dollar for that one African. Okay,
Right.
he paid top dollar for that one African, and of course the men were worth more than the women, and and so on. So he's an African man. He's worth the most. Okay, and they have a whole bunch of indigenous black women. Okay, he impregnates all of them. Then they all give birth. So now but he wants top dollar for all of his baby slaves. Okay, so he's gonna go out and try and sell those. All right, so he's gonna try and sell them. But here's the thing: does he sell them as African, or does he sell them as native?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Mm.
I
Right?
get what you're saying. Yeah.
What's gonna get you the most money? Well,
Mhm.
they're selling them as natives, or sorry, you start selling them as Africans.
Yeah.
And he's going to obviously tell them that it's purebred African. He's top. Give me as much as I can get.
Yeah.
And this was happening so frequently. It was happening so frequently that the Virginia slave courts get overwhelmed, as do
Mm.
some of the other ones in the South. Start getting overwhelmed with guys saying, "Hey, look, I paid for a full-bred African, a full-bred African. He gave me, a mixed indigenous and African.
Really?
So
That's
I should be
interesting.
paying half or a quarter or whatever."
Yeah.
And so this causes them to have to change the laws to the point where they say, "Hey, look, all right, here's the deal. We can't handle all these cases. We're getting bogged down with paperwork and all this other stuff. Listen, we're making a new law. One drop black blood, and he's as good as African. He's as good as a Negro. So you're all paying top dollar. That's the end of that. We just settled it. They're all
Yeah.
Africans. That's it. They're
That's
Africans."
that's interesting. I've always wondered because we're taught that the one drop rule had different kind of nefarious origins, right?
Mhm.
No, and
Um,
there's multiple valuable ways.
yeah,
The same because oftentimes the breeder wasn't an African. The breeder was the slave master himself, right?
yeah,
Mm.
yeah.
So this is how you get out of responsibility for your children is
The
you
one
say,
drop
"Oh,
rule.
well, it's
Yeah,
One
one
drop
drop.
rule.
So there you
yeah,
go."
yeah.
Damn.
So that's the other, and it's sick and disgusting.
Mm,
That's the thing. It's a sick and disgusting history, but it is the
it
true
is
reality.
history.
It
And
Yeah.
is
so
history.
and so this is where we get this number of 12 million because they were
Mm,
breeding. Most of these guys are being bred on the continent, and we just take that final number of all the people who were enslaved at by the end time by the end of
okay.
slavery, and we say, well, there was 12 million of these slaves. So we not knowing the whole history behind it and the whole study behind it, we assume that all those slaves were African.
Mhm.
When in reality, there is less than a million that we can point to,
Hmm.
that we can concretely confirm, came over on a slave ship.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
very interesting. Yeah,
Hmm.
for sure. So that's a lot to
I
take
know,
in.
right? That's
Yeah, it
that's what I'm
Yeah.
is.
saying. And our
Yeah.
story in Nova Scotia is again, there's so much that goes into that too. It's just kind of like, but you got to get into the weeds. You got to get into the nitty gritty of it and actually look at, okay, so who is coming at what point from where,
Mhm.
and it's a paradigm shifting thing because I went through this too. I taught that, like I said at the beginning, I taught that same story of, okay, yeah,
Mhm.
they brought those slaves, over 12 million of them,
Yeah.
and that was that. It's like, well, there's a little bit more to that.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well,
even the logistics behind that doesn't really work.
yeah. Well,
Hmm.
I mean, just for the simple fact of how it was such a big money business, so they would do
Mm,
anything to just keep that rolling in any capacity that they could, whether it was not taking the people from their own land
yeah,
and just. But like you say, all those things are just interesting in the way that how to sort of almost divide and conquer and have power over people. Like that's the mentality that we ended up getting caught in, thinking
yeah,
that we couldn't break free of this kind of thing. Yeah.
yeah. It
Um
Go ahead.
no, yeah. No, I just wanted to say, like, now, obviously, you've experienced a lot of different things being raised in Toronto,
Yeah,
being multiculturally diverse here,
yeah.
and Calgary. I mean, I'm not sure what it's like, but I'm guessing maybe not as much. But how diverse is it in Calgary, and what issues do the BIPOC community face?
Um, okay, two questions. Okay, so
Yeah.
with Calgary, Calgary is far more diverse than I think most people think. I know before I got here, I was definitely freaked out. I remember there was about three brothers that I knew that were out here working. You know, two of them were in the oil sands, one of them was down here,
Hmm.
and they're just like, "Yo, come out, make some money, man, make some money, do the hustle." I said, "All right." I said, you know what, we can do that." I said, "But yo, like, what if the Klan gets me?" You know, all that kind of stuff. And they're like, "Man, don't be stupid. Like, it's fine. Trust me. You're thinking about 50 years ago." And I'm like,
Yeah.
I don't know. Look, all right, look, I'll come stay with you, and because I know that you somehow have survived out there. But so then but eventually when I came out here, what, 2013, and I was pleasantly surprised. I was very surprised. I was like, okay, yeah, you know what, it's definitely. I mean, I think there's a couple things to be said about how they do things. I think in Toronto we do things a lot better with multiculturalism, because it's more, as much as here there's a lot of different cultures. Everybody's from different places. They're more enclaves, and they kind of more stick to themselves.
Yeah, yeah, spread out.
Right.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So everybody, yeah, exactly. The Indians over here,
yeah,
the
yeah.
over here, and they all kind of stay to their
Right,
own. Nobody really interacts as much. So I
right.
think that's the largest issue. But as far as racism is concerned, I think there's different types of racism for sure. Um, I think here people tend to be more blunt and
Oh,
direct
really?
Mm.
with their language. Yeah, but I don't think that there's a high level of hatred. I wouldn't say that there's a large level of hatred. I think just people are more blunt with their language about surrounding race, and that will
Mhm.
throw a lot of people off, as opposed to I find the racism in Toronto worse in a lot of ways, because
Yeah. It's
it's
overt.
covert.
It's
It's
Yeah,
overt.
overt.
Yeah, yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
yeah.
And it's like that it'll hinder me from getting a job in Toronto, for
Hmm.
example.
Hmm.
Whereas, you know, somebody out here who's going to give me a job might be more forthright with talking about my race. Oh, they may not, they shouldn't be, but they'll still give me the job. So I'm, okay, yeah, whatever, let's do this. As opposed to whereas back home, where it's more, hey, oh, we found a different candidate. You're like,
Yeah.
oh, okay,
Yeah,
okay,
a
fine.
candidate that
Yeah,
fits our culture more.
yeah,
Yeah,
Our
exactly.
work
yeah,
So
yeah,
culture.
exactly,
yeah,
something to that
yeah.
effect, where you're like, okay,
Yeah.
but what's the situation? So, and to the other question, well, again, with with the BIPOC community at this point, I find certain things troubling that I think are kind of overlooked a lot of the time. I think our focus is a lot of times on the wrong things.
Mhm.
So, I mean, I'm fairly old school and traditional on respect. Like I said, we were talking about Father Malcolm X doing his thing, giving us that beautiful ideology. Marcus Garvey, all these different guys, uh, you know, who would speak about a mentality of building for ourselves, right? I think a lot of times we go in a direction which is more the white liberal direction of things, where they will like to say, "Hey, look, let us do for you,"
Mm.
and that comes a lot from their white guilt, which is well earned, well deserved, sure, whatever. But but I don't think ultimately that's what does the best for our people.
Right.
I would like to see more of what you guys are doing, which is, you guys bring people on, you build us up, right? I want, you what do you call it? The FUBU, you know,
Mm.
uh, by us for us, right? Right.
Mhm.
Hmm.
Have us build up ourselves and each other. I mean, the best economic times for Black people on this continent were back in the 50s and 40s and 50s, where you had Black Wall Street. And
Yeah.
remember, these are the times where people are the most racist,
Yeah.
right? They're
Mm.
far more racist than they were now, doing killing us day by day.
Yeah.
But what made us more economically powerful was the very fact that we had to stick together and we had only each other to rely on. In
Right.
fact, the top banks at that time in history were black banks, and the reason for that was because 100% of all the black people went to those banks because these white racists, their racism backfired on them.
Mm.
Mhm.
They said you couldn't bank with us because you're black, and we said okay, fine, we'll put all our money in one place
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
consolidate our money. So we got richer off of their stupidity,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and they realized that. So for me, I think it's better for us to kind of move away from, especially language like even when we talk about BIPOC, it's like okay, there we go again, consolidating who we are.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
We
I've
we've
kind of
we've
always yeah.
yeah, we've spoken to people that have not issue, but concerns with that acronym.
Mhm.
Yeah, I
Definitely.
mean, because you're saying Black Indigenous, right?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
it's like, and for me, I go, okay, so like, what do we mean? Especially because I know how the language has been used against us over and
Mhm.
over again. Like they're constantly playing with and changing our identity,
Yeah.
these labels. And I have no problem with being called a black man. I'm a very proud black man, but
Mhm.
I understand that that has a double meaning. It has a legal meaning, right? And and then it has a colloquial meaning. But what is not in there is an ethnic meaning, is a
Mhm.
national
Yeah.
meaning,
Mhm.
right? So, in other words, to say, where are the black lands, right? If I call a man Ghanaian or Nigerian or whatever,
Yeah.
you know, they can point back to, hey, this is where I'm from, this is who I am, right? And especially us as Scotians, I think it's important for us to look up and look into, and this is why I have um, what our nationality is, what our heritage is, what our interests are, and our original people used to call themselves the Loon, right? Before the term Mi'kmaq or Micmac, as we like to bastardize it, we used to call ourselves the Loon. And I'd like to see us more return to that because in that we can establish this is our homeland, this is our
Mhm.
indigenous land, and not only that, there's a culture that goes in with that, and that culture, remember, that culture picking up from the past and carrying forward the best of us,
Mhm.
right? And I
Mhm.
think we can definitely use that in the time period in which we live now.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Definitely.
definitely.
Curtis, this has been a fantastic discussion, man. Like seriously, I'm glad that my cousin Corey put himself forward and introduced us.
Mhm.
Appreciate
it's
it
Yeah.
on my side too. I love it.
it's been a blessing. Now, before we end, is there anything that you want to kind of end on? Any type of thoughts or notes there?
I just a couple of things. I think like we're constantly looking into the history of Nova Scotian, the Indigenous blacks in Nova Scotia, for this reason, picking up our heritage and putting it forth. We just launched our website on our history, exclusively our history, so we can understand it.
Hmm.
It's called Lnug, Lnug. That's Lnug .ca. For those who are trying to do some more research into it, it's a continuous effort. Um, I definitely would encourage that because for us as a people, um, we we feel that we've lost so much, but once you do the digging, you'll find more of it. And for me as an individual, it has been um, earth shaking, to say the least,
Mhm.
paradigm shifting,
Mhm.
um, and but I have so much more respect for us as a people, as Scotians, so much more appreciation. Like we are truly a genius population. I just I'm the things I find out blow my mind about about who and what we are. And I'm truly thankful to be Scotian. It's so funny because you look around and you see that people have done great things all throughout the world. Absolutely,
Mhm.
absolutely. I love that's why I love culture. But
Mhm.
um, I think people will be pleasantly surprised the more you look into our history as Indigenous Blacks in Nova Scotia.
Mhm.
Awesome. That's
Yeah.
great. Jay Jones, take us out, man.
Yeah, man. Thanks for coming on and sharing some of the knowledge that you have, some histories that I didn't know for sure. And it always sort of comes back to that one thing. Like if we look at Black communities as a whole, you growing up and sort of seeing drug dealers and do the different things and everything that they were morally doing wrong, they were also morally doing something right by telling you to say, hey, man, stay on the right path. And that is the basis of Black community, and that's something we need to get back to, coming together to lift each other up, no matter how we survive. And survival is a thing that we all must do. And it just parts of this conversations made me sort of go back to that and look at Nova Scotia and be fortunate enough to come from the community that we came from, because that's where our history is. That's where our identity is, beyond what we don't see in the books. It's what we are, always have been, and continue to be going forward. And thanks for sharing those things, because those things came to light for me. So I just want to thank you for coming on, man.
Yeah,
Awesome.
much appreciated. It was good talk.
Good
Yeah,
talk. Good
great.
talk. Thanks again,
Right.
man.
Take care.
Breaking new ground, breaking new ground, breaking new ground, simple breaking new ground, breaking new ground.
You have been listening to Down Home. Subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.
Breaking new ground, simple breaking new ground, breaking new ground, breaking new ground, yeah. On a high plateau, from the one down below to the future of the funk, getting lost in the flow. Contact with the spot magex. Now it's time to flex with the force from the soul, reaching all aspects, getting deep, no time to sleep. As you reach your next phase, laying it all on the line. New trails start to blaze. It's a fire inside, a brand new path, breaking down the sum to one. Feeling free, I just laugh with the joy of
The song, Breaking New Ground,
from
The Breakdown.
Like magic prescribed, only to see the perfect blend, like a diamond in the rough, ready to drop a perfect gem. It's time to shine so fine, to see what you find. Revelation.